It's my pleasure to welcome and introduce Pierluigi Mancarella. Pierluigi has at the moment 3 affiliations. So he's the Chair Professor of Electric Energy Systems at the University of Melbourne in Australia. He's also a Professor of Electric Power Systems at the University of Manchester in the UK. And now and for the next 3 months, he's also the Otto Mönstedt Visiting Professor here at DTU. Pierluigi got his Master's and PhD from the University of Torino in Italy, and then he moved to Imperial College for his postdoc before joining Manchester as a faculty there. He's one of the 3 senior editors of IEEE Transactions on Power Systems. So you know when you submit your papers where this goes through. And he's also the principal investigator for the US, UK, Australia Global Center on Climate Change. And can you guess where the first global meeting takes place? Here at DTU, actually, in 2 weeks from now. Okay. So with Pierluigi, we're happy to listen to your talk.
Super. No, thanks for a kind introduction. And what I'm going to show you today is a little bit of a mix of what is happening in Australia and somehow how our research is really addressing real-world issues, and pretty big, some of them. And also very happy to say basically all our projects are industry-based. We do not have any real research council project. So everything you will see here is really kind of motivated by industry requirements, and then somehow we try to provide solutions. So very much aligned, I think, with the philosophy and all that Jalal was like presenting in the beginning today with regards to what the group here is doing at DTU. So just a few words about the member group in Melbourne. I don't know, has anyone been in Australia or in Melbourne? Great. Okay, a few of you. Great. So it's the city is considered one of the most livable cities in the world. It's just very full of activities, including like sport activities, like Formula 1, tennis, and everything else. There's also like beautiful beaches, and I live there, just in case. And and historical university is somehow considered the best university of Australia. There are lots of things that happened historically in there. If you believe in the rankings or not, somehow it's one of the top universities and tries to stay there with the best ones around the world. Obviously, it's not easy. It's like a small country. You lack somehow scale, but definitely doing very, very good. And there are lots of international students, as you can imagine, like a little bit also like here. So this is a group, relatively small. The group, many of you I think might know my colleague and good friend Nando Choa. That's deals more with distribution networks. My work is more about technical economy modeling, planning, integrated energy systems kind of thing. And then we have the third lecturer is like Glenn, who's our expert in power electronics. But effectively, as we speak, we are appointing for 3 new people. So I think we've identified the 3 of them. And yeah, so the group is going very rapidly and hopefully stronger, not only bigger. We'll see. Now, a few things about Australia. If probably many of you will know very little about that. That's a huge interconnected system. Just to give you a little bit of an idea from here, it's like in here there's like the Great Barrier Reef, pretty much in here, Cairns, and then down all around South Australia. So this is Victoria, and Melbourne is here. So this interconnected system is about 5,000 kilometers long. So it's pretty incredible system, which as power system engineers, I think many of you will be power system engineers. You can imagine how much fun you can have with all the stability issues that would arise in an interconnected system like this. Multi areas, and really interesting. We'll show some of this, particularly with regards to this circle here. That's South Australia. Lots of things happen in South Australia because it's one of the places around the world with the deepest penetration, not only of renewables, but also of distributed energy resources. And this makes, I think, particularly interesting. There is just some information here about how the Australian system, Australian market works. So there is about 65 gigawatts of installed capacity, large scale, plus 20 gigawatts of rooftop PV. This for a peak demand of 33. So it's a huge penetration of distributed energy resources. This is of November 2023. If we look at now, probably the rooftop PV has already increased by maybe a few gigawatts. It's really incredible how fast things happen. The market runs as an energy-only market. We know a formal time ahead market or year commitment or anything, so it's really run real time with a 5 minutes dispatch and the co-optimization of energy and reserves, and also called frequency control and serial services, including the very recent so-called very fast service. In fact, it's a fast frequency response service. So we have a sub-second fast frequency response services, 2 primary frequency response services, and 1 secondary frequency response services. So this co-optimization happens every 5 minutes, and it works very, very efficiently in terms of allocating resources and provide system security. Unfortunately, as efficient as good that I think the market is run so far, I think we will see like big challenges that they're coming up soon. Again, as I said, because it's huge network, so it's like lots of stability problems can arise there. It's radial, and this has got pros and cons. More importantly, it's a synchronous island, so somehow all the balancing is to be procured locally. And then, as I mentioned earlier, the fact that there is this huge penetration of rooftop PV, there's also unevenly distributed across the country. So there are areas with really huge penetration and areas with much lower penetration, creates a very, very interesting cases, as I will show you. Now, we talk about the energy transition. Is it a technology problem that we are talking about? Well, I think we know pretty much for more than 50 years that it's not a technology problem. I think we know this since we sent the man to the moon. Engineers, you give them money, they can do everything. I mean, these are real miracles, right? So I don't think it's a technology problem. It's like, again, giving the money to engineers can do everything. However, the problem is that we need to solve the problem in a kind of social, techno-economic environments and policy environments that we have. And if you look at a number of statements that took this from the former chief scientist of Australia, so the clean energy transition is humanity's biggest ever economic challenge. So yes, technology is a problem, but it's just because there is everything else somehow that technology needs to be placed in. When we talk about technology and kind of the renewables-based energy system, so on, where are we? I'm showing you a picture here of what was happening in this area, South Australia, that I mentioned before, 4 years ago. So as you can see here, effectively the whole, this is a relatively small, this would have been like a spring period. It's about 1.5 gigawatt. I think the peak demand is about 3.5 gigawatt for South Australia. What is the peak demand of Denmark? Is it 4 or 5 gigawatt? 5 gigawatt, yeah. So it's a bit smaller than Denmark, but it's got only one major interconnector. This is the main difference. So effectively, already 4 years ago, 100% of local demand was being supplied by solar energy, particularly 75% rooftop PV. Now, more recently, we have actually days where rooftop PV is supplying basically 100% of local demand. So it's completely running on rooftop PV. This is business as usual every day. That's why I call it fast forward to the future, because like seeing the future is like these are not simulations. That's how South Australia was running. When was this? October last year, and pretty much it runs like this every day now. So obviously the colors should be self-explanatory. Green is wind, yellow is sun, most of which rooftop PV. And then you have some interconnection and gas power plants helping just to balance the grid. However, it's pretty impressive, If you look at this week, effectively 100% contribution from renewables with just one interconnector. You see here exports from wind and solar at times when it's possible. And effectively, if you look at the statistics for this week, you will see that wind was basically supplying 50% of demand, and rooftop PV 25%. This is like energy-wise, of course. During the day, rooftop PV would be prevalent. It seems pretty miraculous in a way. That's exactly the kind of transition we would envisage. So the sun, see, you got sun now, like basically during the day running on solar energy, then the sun goes down, and you see wind somehow picks up during the night, and then if there's not enough wind, then you run your backup plan. If we can call it like this, although it's not really backup. So that's somehow like magic, and it would be wonderful if we could run like entire grids like this. Unfortunately, it's not all the glitters is not gold. It takes actually lots of work to run a grid like this, and somehow it gives a little bit of insights into what will be needed moving forward, especially in countries that may be more isolated than others. Please.
Quick question. I know that Australia depends on coal. I
Yeah.
don't see any coal in
There is no coal in South Australia. It's all renewables. So where there was coal, it's been kicked out of the market years ago. This is, however, what happens in the very same day. So you can say the glass half full or half empty. So at the same time, while we were running the grid basically with 100% renewables, you were curtailing about 550 megawatts of large-scale solar. So it's like basically, the sun is shining for everyone, but you got so much rooftop PV that everything else, large scale, needs to be curtailed. It's pretty significant. The potential for renewables was actually 250%. So you could have run 2 times the state on renewables. Unfortunately, you couldn't do that. So guess what was happening? You were curtailing everything else. So effectively, you're running a grid with using curtailment as a form of flexibility. And of course, this is not really sustainable moving forward. So in a way, it's like it's easy, or easy, relatively easy. I will show you that there are lots of other things we need to consider. But of course, it may become expensive once you build all these resources, and it becomes important to understand the kind of portfolio that you need moving forward. You want to go at scale. In fact, you have big issues there that's got to do with the new physics somehow that is associated with operating grids like this technically and then economically, how the market would deliver on that. So there is a range of issues. You could try to categorize them in different ways, but it actually goes from frequency control inertia to system. Oops, what's happening here? That's a small blackout, and no, that's okay. So that's. Okay, so that's the other one is, you can just come here, sorry for you guys. Then there is variability, uncertainty, and more importantly, visibility, and then aspects associated with system strength, voltage stability, and the things I will show you in a second. So let's start with the frequency control and inertia problems. Again, back to South Australia. The title there of the slide is a textbook example, the black system event of September 2016. In fact, Australia is connected to a grid with a small DC link, so doesn't really provide inertia support, so it's currently. And then there is one AC interconnector. So at that time, September 2016, there were like major lightning strikes across the grid. And then exactly like our models of system resilience, lightning strikes, and then towers going down, power flows, rerouting. And eventually, there was, because of all the dynamic effects that were happening in transmission level during these lightning strikes, at some point, large volume of wind power was lost. So because of the operation of the protection settings of wind farms, many of them tripped pretty much at the same time. So what is the problem? The problem is that at the time, the grid was running like this. When we talk about low inertia grids, that is what will look like. So effectively like half of the country running on wind, not providing inertia, mostly interconnected by power electronics. Very little amount of thermal energy, less than 25%, like 20% of local energy coming from synchronous machines, and then the rest was coming from the interconnector. So the moment that you start losing all that power, wind power, obviously pretty much instantaneously the power is transferred across the AC interconnector. The AC interconnector gets overloaded thermally or stability-wise. There are lots of things happening during these events, and eventually the interconnector tripped. So when the interconnector trips, now you remain there as an island. An island is a system that is running with some of the remaining wind and very little thermal generators. So effectively, you have a typical case where you see that regardless of how much capacity and potential steady state reserves you have in the grid, eventually dynamically your frequency response when you lose a generator, an interconnector, whatever, really depends on the level of inertia. Now here, again, you can see the high inertia grid with a slower dynamic and a lower inertia grid with a much faster dynamics. Now realizing effectively that when you start running grids with renewables, you really need to account for the fact that frequency response dynamic requirements become inertia dependent, which was not something that in real time was actually realized by the system operator. And I'm talking about 2016, okay? So I'm not talking about the papers that you may have written. Well, I'm talking about the real world that was happening before you wrote the papers. So it's like, how do we do that? In fact, there was a major issue, and when we talk about, for example, I don't know if some of you is working on kind of low inertia grids, frequency control, what would you consider as a very high rate of change of frequency that can become dangerous? Well, very good. I think the only non-power system engineer in the room provided the perfect answer. Thank you. Well, guess what it was? Rate of change of frequency here. Well, this is the picture of when the system got disconnected. So effectively, the rest of Australia kept running, of course, and then you have the separation event and the frequency collapse. 7 hertz per second. This is the risk that we are facing moving forward. So obviously 7 hertz per second, the system is collapsing in half a second. There is nothing that can save it. No reserve, no protection, nothing. So the only thing you can do is you try to prevent that. So following this event, there was a major review of market operation run by the minister and the chief scientist. And because it say like, okay, how come, what happened there? Again, nobody really understood what was happening. It's like, again, back to 7-8 years ago, way before papers came out. So actually, we were tasked to perform the studies for the minister and chief scientist to support the review, and that's when somehow we developed the first modeling, showing how you would have to effectively coordinate not only co-optimize energy and FCAS, but also co-optimize the level of inertia you have in the grid and the level of the contingency size that you need in the grid. Because effectively, unless you manage actively the largest contingency, that it can be a larger generator, or in the case of a separation event, can be the flows across interconnectors. Basically, either you cannot save the grid, or it becomes too expensive to do it. You would need too many reserves to produce. So we developed the modeling to be able to show that, and eventually informing the developments of a number of tools. Actually, the modeling that we developed was taken by a system operator in Western Australia. They put the principles there in the control room. We developed, I'm not showing here, so-called the frequency response security maps, where effectively you can monitor in real time the level of risk when you're running a low inertia grid, and eventually leading to the case somehow that you will need to develop new services that do not exist in the market. Now, it took 6 years, 7 years to introduce the fast frequency response market, and now we're starting talking about inertial markets. I'm not very convinced about inertial markets. That's a different story. However, the way that in principle you would perform the modeling to understand how much you need to procure in an optimal way somehow is the kind of things that we've done some time ago. In the meantime, fortunately, while modeling was developed, please.
Why did it take so long, 6-7 years, to implement this product?
Have you ever worked in the markets regulation and policy? That's the answer. So it's all goodwill. It just takes lots of time when you have to deal with the real world, right? So, and in the meantime, fortunately, while there were lots of discussions, there were also brilliant engineers and entrepreneurs trying to help with problem. That's when you build history. It's like. There is a crisis, and when there is a crisis, the genius of human beings and entrepreneurs, particular, comes up. So in this case, it was Elon Musk building this Horsetail power reserve battery. This was effectively the first large-scale battery that would provide frequency support services in the world. It's also called Tesla Big Battery. It was 100 megawatts at the time, and it was built in 100 days. There was maybe if you follow a little bit of the story, there was a tweet. I don't use Twitter, I don't know what it is. So anyway, there was a tweet between Elon Musk and another billionaire in Australia, and Elon Musk literally said, "I think you may need some batteries." So okay, can you give us some battery? Said, "Yes, I can give you 100 megawatt in 100 days, and if I don't build it, it's free." Do you think he built it in 100 days? Money talks, right? So that's how we have this incredible technologies being developed. And it really changed completely the way of looking at systems in a way. I don't know if we realize enough how transformative these technologies are. And again, I'm not talking about the simulations, I'm talking about the real world. Effectively, the idea is that with some fast frequency response from batteries, you can try to push back that frequency response to kind of high inertia grid. Eventually say, if I do not have enough synchronous inertia that I can inject into the grid, can I replace it with some form of very fast injections? That is what the batteries would do. Of course, the physics will not work exactly like this, but this is the principle. So how would this battery perform? Well, let's start with the regulation service. Say, following the 4 seconds regulation signal, AGC signal, the system operator would send to a few providers of the regulation service. This is how a conventional generator would respond to the signal of the system operator, the 4 second signal of the system operator. You want to see how the battery responds to that. You want to see how the battery responds to a contingency event. So you lose a larger generator. You want to see how the battery responds. This is not. Don't tell me. But I also do the same thing in Simulink. That is not. This is like we're talking about a 150 megawatt battery. Okay. That is the contingency response of the battery. So this is the frequency, and that's the droop response of the battery. Delay that cannot even be noticed, a perfect droop response. Now, this has to be compared with a generator, conventional generator, that is taking 3 or 4 seconds to understand that something is happening in the grid. And the battery has already provided basically full droop response and stabilizing the grid and so on. So this is like, as I say, the equivalent of seeing an alien spaceship landing into Earth. It's like we have old power systems, old synchronous machines, and so on, and now you have this new fantastic technology that is now really being deployed. It's not just simulation. The original was 100 megawatt hour for 100 megawatt for 1.5 megawatt hour, so times 1.5. Now I think it's become 150 times something like this, but it's about 1.5 hours. It's not really there for energy. It's really for capacity. And then it's not only about frequency response, because there are lots of other interesting things that you can do. What else could you do with a battery? Yeah, use for store renewable energy. Yeah, arbitrage. What else? Can we do reactive power support? Can we provide some stability service? So no, we come up with all these ideas as researchers. The real world does always better than us. Look at what these guys are doing with the battery. They turn it into an attraction. tourist attraction. You know, you build this incredible technology, you make a tourist attraction, and then people like myself there start going, you know, on a road trip in Australia. It's a beautiful place there, you know, to see the big battery. I mean, the size of the battery is very disappointing compared to everything else you have around, but it's still a good excuse to go on a road trip to Australia. So I would invite you, everyone to actually take a visit, you know, to a big battery in a way. Right, okay, so at the same time, I mean, somehow this kind of discussions about low inertia grids and frequency control, they are progressing. We see that there are these technologies there that can do big things. But how about the other issues of variability, uncertainty, visibility? You know, if you look at that, we're talking about balancing wind reserves. You know, like, I mean, my background as an academic is from the UK. You know, we worked together with Rodrigo many years. You know, this kind of discussions happened for maybe 20 years. And so we thought that actually we pretty much knew everything about ramps, reserves, and all that, until, of course, you see the real-world problems. And, for example, you start realizing that one thing is to have renewables that can be dispatchable, controllable, the transmission grids, and the other one is to have most renewables as invisible distributed energy resources that are down there in the distribution networks, of which effectively the system operator doesn't know anything, and the market doesn't know anything, because it's like effectively most of them are on feed-in tariffs. So there is a retailer interaction with retailers, but effectively there is like huge amount of rooftop PV that is in there, is injecting energy into the grid, and not participating in the market, effectively being technically and economically invisible to market. So, and to the system operator. So what are the consequences of doing this? Well, I showed before the system balancing, it looks really nice. Well, let's look at curtailment, I mentioned before, and the prices that you have at the same time. So what do you see on these prices here? You know, the blue line that I'm showing here is the zero level, the prices. So what you see that is happening is effectively that every time that there is a sun, prices become negative, systematically. Sun is shining for everyone, and because rooftop PV is so big, they don't participate in the market, basically they are kind of dispatched with priority automatically. And at the same time, prices go negative because you have too much wind. So the conventional generators, the large-scale solar farms that would also like to produce are now exposed to market prices, and they self-curtail. So they perform economic curtailment. So you have basically a competition between the same technology, only the one is invisible to the market and the other one is visible. And the one visible to the market has to be price responsive, otherwise then we have to pay to generate. Of course, as soon as the wind is not there and you need to start activating gas turbines and so on, then you need huge ramps and so on, and you may have like scarcity in ramps and not just in capacity, and prices start spiking, and then you see very, very high volatility in the market prices, so like negative during the day, and then of course all these spikes. And because there is a 5 minutes dispatch, effectively, this volatility may be very, very significant. If you see, prices go up and down, it's pretty impressive. Again, the theory would tell us that's what happens, that's what should happen somehow to provide flexibility signals to new developers, and well, that's what is happening in Australia. Is it having an impact? Well, yes, because all the poor large-scale solar farms effectively are no longer making any money. Please.
Which technology is exactly meaning negative?
Solar farms, large-scale solar farms. Because they would like to produce, but rooftop PV is so big, they're especially covering already all the demand. So solar farms need to perform economic curtailment. Otherwise, we have to pay to stay there, and of course, you don't need the energy. So all these poor, again, solar farms are effectively no longer able to produce. Forget about it, like trying to recover investment, just cannot produce anything. So of course, then those signals are very adequate to say, well, you should probably build the batteries there, and that's how you are actually introducing all this now hybrid plant. Because first of all, because there is huge volatility, then the batteries would be very suitable to extract value from this volatility. Second, because by being behind the meter, in many cases with the solar farms, they can also limit the impact, the negative impact on solar farms. And of course, while doing that, can also start playing with multiple value streams, because what is happening now is that you are building all these hybrid plants, mostly solar and batteries, but also wind more recently, and then you start providing all kind of ancillary services that batteries could provide to boost the business case for the batteries and for the hybrid plant. And again, there are lots of things that could be done with batteries. I'm sure I'm putting there like some of the papers we wrote to illustrate also kind of mathematically how this would be done. Of course, in some cases, things are done in a way that's less sophisticated than in our papers. In other cases, I have to say that the real world is actually way beyond what researchers would do, and is really inspiring actually to see how some of these developments are happening basically ahead of research. Now, moving forward, so if I look at what is happening to the future system, a little bit like what Rodrigo was showing before, we are here. And in the kind of what is considered the step change central scenario for a system operator, you see that when you go towards 2050, in fact, you see that, first of all, renewables will start dominating. Clearly, you have to pretty much triple the capacity that you will need from renewables. Now, this was also shown before with Professor Newberry. And the amount of distributed energy is impressive, because there will be huge amount of distributed rooftop PV, a huge amount of distributed storage in the grid. When I say distributed, I really mean either in houses or, for example, at community level. So we talk a lot about community storage. We show a little bit more. So obviously, you can't go on dealing with a system like this without understanding what to do with the distributed energy resources, how to make them visible and participating in the market. And then that's when we started developing lots of ideas. First of all, about how aggregation could really help and the development of distributed markets. And you, especially if some of you is following the work of my colleague Nando, there are lots of discussions about, for example, this issue of dynamic operating envelopes. Effectively, how try to build constraints for distributed resources that could be automatically communicated to, for example, rooftop PV, battery storage, electric vehicles, and so on, in order to somehow prevent these resources from overloading the grid, overloading or creating voltage issues in the grid. And then when you look at a nodal level, we call nodal operating envelope. So the aggregate of that, how can you use actually that aggregate to create visibility and in case provide system services to the upstream grid. So the very interesting thing, this is what we developed in this Project Edge, there is a real trial of a distributed market, is how can you bring together the needs to prevent basically the local grid from being overloaded in general, and how you could actually provide system services, or you could sell more energy to the grid. That's why when we started looking more, for example, into the reactive power features, including the ability of pricing reactive power, because reactive power will have a value in creating local capacity and eventually unlocking capacity to, for example, provide energy or other system services upstream to the grid and to the market. For example, an interesting case is imagine when you look at this kind of what's called nodal operating envelope, effectively is the picture of the hosting capacity of the network. It's just that this picture will change every 5 minutes. So every 5 minutes you can assess what the hosting capacity of the grid is, not only in terms of active power, but also reactive power. So if you are, for example, operating here, then you would say the hosting capacity potentially could be that one. So if I saw some price signals, for example, I got batteries there, they're waiting, and if there is a good price signal, I could sell energy. That is the active power that I could sell if I'm operating there. Only to realize that, for example, if you change your aggregate level of reactive power to the new operational point, effectively you could significantly enlarge your hosting capacity and potentially selling much more active power. So when you do this, first of all, how you do it technically, okay, that's relatively simple to solve. Then what is the actual value of that reactive power once it is unlocking active power services, and how do you develop markets or contracts, back to the previous presentation, to actually enable that would effectively allow much more efficient operation of the local grids, integrated into the larger grid. Because once you start doing all this, you can start thinking that, well, it's not only energy services, of course, it's also frequency control ancillary services and other forms of services. So you can start mapping locally the ability of your resources to provide for 1 second, 6 seconds, 60 seconds. These are the kind of frequency control ancillary services that we have in Australia. And effectively, every 5 minutes, you can come up with a picture of the flexibility that you have in your aggregate of distributed resources, and what kind of grid services you could provide upstream. That picture I put in there is effectively the area of Melbourne where we are building the new university campus, your engineering campus. Effectively, we performed a number of feasibility studies, try to make it somehow VPP ready, try to turn the campus into a virtual power plant with this idea of providing this kind of services. Now, it's not only necessarily campuses or as a matter of fact, aggregates of batteries at household level, that's all happening, but also very interesting ideas of using community batteries. For example, to say, this is like a big project actually, is like called Power Melbourne, sponsored by the city of Melbourne, effectively building a network of community batteries, so each battery would effectively bring together a neighborhood, so as to allow sharing of resources, even for basically households who could not afford a battery, do not have the space to do that. And of course, with batteries, you're also able somehow to share solar energy in particular. And then you build a network of this, so you build effective virtual power plants of community batteries. And then you can do lots of innovation in terms of business models you could develop around this, the moment you can share resources. And then you need to build, of course, the battery, so we're paying for that and so on. So it's lots of interesting work. We supported the city of Melbourne with the development of the techno-economic modeling to achieve that. And then linking to what Rodrigo was presenting before, we've done lots of work together, we're working on this together, is actually the idea of saying, when you look at the future, where there are all these distributed energy resources, what is their role in system planning? Because effectively at the moment, distributed resources are largely neglected. So you perform, the system operator in Australia has got this very large exercise called integrated system plan. Other system operators in the world, for example, future energy scenarios of National Grid in the UK, perform some kind of similar thinking. But then again, these scenarios will not happen altogether, right? So they will evolve. The future will evolve in different ways. And when you perform the analysis, distributed resources are basically seen there somehow as a negative, not negative, like a passive entity would be there, but not really contributing to system development. So much of the work that we did, research, but also somehow in projects supporting also system operators' understanding of what could happen, is try to understand the role of distributed resources and storage. And of course, as Rodrigo showed before, effectively you cannot assess the value of distributed resources unless you do it stochastically. Because effectively their value really lies on the fact that with their operational flexibility, they also bring planning flexibility and the ability of displacing large-scale investments. They might, for example, become stranded assets if the wrong scenario happens. Instead, with distributed resources providing all the right flexibility, you could actually avoid all these issues. Then there is like our most recent papers actually being presented next week at PSSC in Paris, as some of you is coming along, where effectively we show a number of features of the planning with distributed resources. So first of all, the moment that you introduce controllability in distributed resources, you significantly reduce the requirement for investment. This pretty much, it's visible a little bit everywhere. You know, for example, if you take even deterministic case, non-controlled DR and deterministic case with controlled DR, every time controlled DR can actually somehow bring much lower levels of investment. You see here range because the range is across scenarios. And then, however, it's much more evident when you look at this from a stochastic perspective, because effectively you see that in a stochastic sense, it's very clear somehow how much you could reduce the need for investment, because when you have like controlled DR, you know, this green here, these are for different stages of the investment, exactly the kind of multi-stage investment model that Rodrigo was showing before. So when you do that, effectively you see that the range of investments you have with time is much less, much smaller, and then clearly somehow you can show that introducing controllability of DR can reduce system cost. Much of this is really coming from having a stochastic model showing that. For example, the model shows that you can have anticipatory decisions. Anticipatory decisions are essential because you need to build, for example, transmission before renewables. And the modeling here is showing that. Because, for example, you see in this case that the stochastic investment when you control DR, so the amount that you would need, is larger than any deterministic scenario. So effectively saying you have a bunch of deterministic scenarios, you think you need to build this transmission, you do it stochastically now, you need to build more transmission. Because some transmission would be very, very useful for what is coming potentially next. So it's not only about delaying investment, it's also about anticipating investment, which is one of the big things we need to do. Then the stochastic model presents much less investment risk because effectively the range of scenarios becomes much smaller. So the range of investment becomes much smaller in a stochastic modeling than in deterministic modeling. And then eventually you somehow provide almost like a risk hedge value when you have controllable DR, because effectively, again, the range of investment you could perform and somehow how wrong you can be is much smaller than in a case where you do not have DR controllability. Given different scenarios, the range of investment may be very large and also very wrong. The moment that you do it stochastically and including the role of DR to provide system support, this operational flexibility that Rodrigo mentioned before, actually you bring huge value to the grid. And eventually you build a plan that is much more stable. So in a deterministic sense, you have huge variations of the investment you might need across time. Instead, in this case, you just have you have a path that is much better defined in terms of amount of capacity you will need to invest into the grid. So all of this is really like central to what is happening in Australia because of the huge penetration of DR in particular, but there are other discussions that are happening at the level of stability, particularly with regards to so-called system strength. And we start again from a real-world operation here. If you look at this picture, huge amounts of solar energy in the grid, and then prices there. Why do you think that these gas generators are operating while there are either negative prices or prices that are very close to zero? Certainly these prices are much lower than short-run marginal cost of gas plants. So how come that we have all these gas plants running in the grid with those prices? They are providing reserves, yes? Yeah, this is all correct. And can't we provide, for example, these services with wind farms? Could we provide reserves with wind or solar? Remember, at the same time, we are curtailing lots of energy, right? So we could, for example, perform pre-curtailment and provide reserves with solar farms. But there are things that at the moment technologies are really not very good to provide, which is the so-called system strength services. But starting from short circuit current to effectively all voltage stability services, this idea of forming the grid, forming the voltage in terms of very nice shape of the voltage waveform. So at the moment, this is done by synchronous machines. The moment synchronous machines disappear, you need someone to actually form the grid. So at the moment, if we do not have many options, so the system operator asks all these turbines to run, to provide the services, even if the energy market will say, well, it should not do that. Unfortunately, this is happening because the minimum demand, in many cases, the minimum demand is happening now during the day and not during the night as it used to be. And during the day, when there is all this rooftop PV in the grid, effectively the system operator doesn't know what is happening. And in order to provide stability, you just say, well, I need to use my synchronous machines there to help me, because if there is a problem, it might have a cascading. Of course, no, in order to do that, so first of all, you have, these are the number of off-market directions for system strength, starting 6-7 years ago. This is basically system operator intervening into the market. Basically, markets are missing, again, to use the terminology before. So markets, we don't have everything in the market because we do not have this kind of new markets. And second, we have in here the average curtailment that you need to perform, because of course if you need more synchronous machines into the grid to provide stability services, you need to curtail energy that might otherwise be available. So it's very nice to see the kind of conflict between these two old gentlemen I forgot to mention before. So who is the gentleman here, up here? That's Adam Smith. That is associated with markets, obviously. And who is this guy? That's Kirchhoff, is associated with power system laws, of course. So, yeah, I'll let you decide. Will the physics or the economics win here? We can't change yet physics laws, right? So, effectively, this came to a point that you really need to curtail lots of renewable energies, like huge amount of wind and solar energy being curtailed to the point was called the rhombus of regret, because there were so many stability issues that the only way to provide stability was basically switching off solar farms and running synchronous machines in case. And this is just a number of stability issues again that are happening. So if eventually the solution was instead of running synchronous machines, let's keep running synchronous machines, but not providing active power. And of course, this what I'm talking about is a synchronous condenser. So I'm still running a synchronous machine, but only to provide the reactive power, inertia, and short circuit current. And it's pretty impressive how at some point, you see here, the synchronous condensers entered in operation in South Australia, and suddenly all these gas plants that were always there, many of these gas plants were switched off because now you had the synchronous condenser providing stability services. Now you have many fewer gas plants running, and there are also the batteries now providing new system services. Things are actually pretty wild. I mean, this is one of the things that happened a few years ago, 2020. This is the real headlines from the ABC News. Electricity provider authorized to switch off rooftop solar in South Australia in emergencies. This is because when you have a grid that is dominated by distributed resources, any kind of event that can happen even in transmission level can generate a cascade at the distribution level. Effectively, transmission level issues can propagate down to distribution, and then because of the way that protection mechanisms works protection mechanisms work for distributed energy resources, they could also disconnect because the rate of change of frequency is too high. You can have problems with the voltages, vector shift protection, or they can have voltage jump, lots of issues that can happen. So at some point, the system operator was not able to provide system security because the risk of losing distributed energy was so big, said, okay, I can't do this. You need to switch off rooftop PV because the risk of tripping is so big that I cannot protect the system against that. This particularly when South Australia was running as an island because there was maintenance on the interconnector. And again, this is just the consequence of DR not really being visible and dispatchable. How would you disconnect 1 million rooftop panels? How many electricians do you think you would have in South Australia? How would you disconnect them? There's the only real control variables we have in the grid, regardless of what you write in your papers. There is only one way to do this, and it's very, very smart. So the actual, who is working on TSO, DSO coordination here? I'm sure that someone is working on TSO, but you know what I'm talking about, right? So I tell you how TSO, DSO coordination is working in the real world. System operator calls the DSO and say, you need to disconnect all rooftop PVs. The DSO say, what are you talking about? And then TSO say, oh, you really need to do this because otherwise we are all in big trouble. And then the very smart people would just start operating the grid with very high voltages. So change the tap in the primary substation, operate the grid with very high voltages for a couple of days. You just operate with these high voltages, and the rooftop PVs disconnect because of high voltage protection, and then you run the grid with conventional generators. Very smart, of course, very inefficient, but this is really what we could do. So at this point, things were so dramatic that we needed to introduce. It's my cue to that should stop. This is really to introduce new kind of contingency situations, because effectively, what is a distributed trip? It's not an n-1 contingency. Which is the one? Which generator, which line are you losing? How big is this? So actually, from a regulatory perspective, you cannot protect against a contingency that you don't know. So the Australian Energy Market Commission actually introduced a new type of contingency called indistinct to actually enable the system operator to protect with reserve services against that contingency. I will skip this part of hydrogen. There is lots of interesting things done on hydrogen, but I will skip this in the interest of time. And I just want to conclude and leave some space. I mean, the slides will be distributed, so you have questions, you can just look at the slides and read the papers. But just to say that this new physics we have is really changing completely the way that we are operating the grid, and we need to operate markets, also was illustrating before. And things can become pretty nasty. I mean, already some time ago, a couple of years ago, we had a huge problem that effectively the system was not operable because gas prices were very high because of the war in Ukraine. So the gas turbines would not run. The batteries, yes, they had some energy, but they were not sure how to self-dispatch against uncertain prices and so on. So at some point, the system operator called the minister and said, look, I cannot operate the grid like this. Can you give me power to go back into economic dispatch? And then, we go back to Power System Economics 101, and the grid was run on economic dispatch for, I think, 1 or 2 weeks, because the market as it was, because of lots of issues that were happening, including the very high gas prices, basically would not enable the grid to run reliably, and system operator was very worried about it. So, yeah, things can become very, very nasty very quickly. So all this is being discussed, this new global center that Spiros introduced before. If there is any of you who feels particularly bright and ambitious and everything else would like to join us, we are hiring at any level. So feel free to drop me an email. It's a very exciting project with Johns Hopkins University and Imperial College, in particular, it's really across the world. And yeah, thank you very much.
Okay, thanks a lot, Pierluigi. So questions?
Yes, one question. I'm Marina from Correzo, one of Europe's RCCs. I have actually two. One, I'm very interested about this indistinct events that you said that the TSOs need to consider a new contingency of the n minus k distributed
N
resource.
minus X.
Yeah, I can imagine.
So I call it N minus 1 minus X.
And they're already incorporating
in the regulatory environment.
Okay.
Because if actually this X is really undefined,
Yeah, of course.
but so before the system operator did not have any power to say there is something that I don't know what it is, but I need to protect against, because it's not in the rules. So you need to follow the rules, right? So they had to introduce this formally. So this is part of the bigger resilience work that's happening in Australia, and it actually completely changes the way you have to operate the grid potentially.
And have you studied up until what is the percentage of distributed generation that needs to happen in a country to start considering this contingency?
Yeah, it's. I think these are studies that the system operator will need to do specifically. But no, it can happen already with a relatively small penetration of distributed energy resources. But if the grid is running, for example, low inertia, it actually means that everything propagates much faster. So you don't need to have lots of distributed resources to do that. So you just need to have a more, what we call the more fragile grid, so that if disturbances really propagate much faster and broader than before, then you can have these kind of issues. And it's not only distributed resources, you can also have indistinct disconnection of renewable farms, that like what happened in the South Australia black system event. So it's really kind of anything that is not just one generator is more like an indistinct event that could happen.
So the next one here.
There is a paper that I think it explains a little bit how this will work. It's cited there.
So I worry. I have a question. So with battery being able to provide all these different types of ancillary services, and with the projected amount of batteries that will enter the market in the next years, do you worry in any way about the saturation of ancillary services market, and that at some point there will be so much storage that will be underutilized in energy, and being able to provide all these ancillary services that the prices of the services would just drop significantly?
I mean, I don't worry. The investors should be worried. I mean, what the very nice things with batteries is they historically seen that because they are so flexible and so capable, also providing all these different services. Effectively, they will always be under different conditions, opportunities to do that. Everything will saturate some point, like all markets saturate. But at that point, I think investors will understand when this is going to happen. So apart from jokes, I think there is, of course, a saturation effect, but I don't think we are anywhere close to seeing that.
Hello. Yes, sir, I have a question regarding aggregated flexibility. You told that aggregated flexibility can be helpful for many applications, right? So how the disaggregation will work, like how we will utilize that flexibility and how the dots will connect to in the low level voltage network, then that disaggregation will happen. Yep. So if I would like...
The great question, and there are many discussions about this. If actually, as I see it, there are like three major ways. One is to be done by kind of the development of distributed energy markets, where effectively say, okay, I can try to have a local market trying to clear, and then this local market is interacting with system level markets. Effectively, you can, for example, imagine a market that is cleared, and while it's cleared, is providing an upstream bid to participate in a kind of wholesale market. So that is one of the philosophies. The other one is you do not have this kind of local market, but you still have aggregators like virtual power plants that aggregate resources and directly bid as entities in the market, so really the VPP model, pure model. The third way is somehow associated with very fine price signals. And you start saying, well, I have very, very nice price signals that eventually, if properly designed temporally and spatially, can provide the kind of aggregated response that I would need at the kind of retail level to interact properly with wholesale markets. There are pros and cons of all the different options. I don't think there is a winner. I mean, there are just lots of discussions about it.
Next one here.
Thank you for the great talk. And I think you also showed a perfect demonstration that during a blackout, the only and probably best way is for a human operator intervention. No matter how many smart people are in the room, like when that display went blackout, the operator needs to step in and fix it. So can you comment on, out of the Australia, do you have an estimate of how many of the DERs you're managing are from the meter? How much are behind the meter?
Yep.
And does behind meter energy DERs is a concern for system operators at Australia?
Yeah, so I do not have the exact number is somehow hidden in those slides. So there are a few pictures that can give you an idea. So every time that you see rooftop PV or distributed PV is actually effectively behind the meter. So for sure in South Australia, so just like parts of Australia, the penetration of rooftop PV is greater than the demand in many cases. Not necessarily at peak times, but saying under normal conditions, effectively, you can supply the local grid. So close to 100% in many cases instantaneously during the day. And it's a issue, yes. There is lots of work happening in terms of distributed resources, how to operate them in a secure way. Much of the work that I showed here in the global center, actually, is in that direction, try to understand how we really need to operate DR, not only in an economically efficient way, but also in a secure and reliable way. There are definitely major concerns about that. It being invisible, they really don't know what is happening. So again, all these aggregation issues go to support the view of the more we understand them in an aggregate way, the better somehow we can do to manage them. But I mean, I don't want to sound negative against it. This is like, because they're a huge resource. As I showed before, the moment that you really use them properly, you can save lots of money for investment, even transmission level and so on. So it's really a huge resource to the point that we call it in Australia now consumer energy resources. And but we need to understand how to really support the operation in a proper way, because it's a new word compared to what we did before.
Great. And the last one here.
Sure. Pierluigi, thank you for the presentation. You were talking about forming the grid.
Yep.
So grid forming technology, for example, from batteries or power electronics. But also I saw slides regarding synchronous condensers,
Yep.
which are actually being installed.
Yep.
What is the state of the discussion regarding these two things? Because can be actually competitors, right?
Yeah, so they are. Thanks, Rodrigo. So yes, it's synchronous condensers. You know exactly what you're buying, and you know exactly how they would operate. And grid forming, I think we're only starting now to understand it. So it's just a matter of kind of known better known technologies. I think we are progressing very fast towards saying grid forming technology can do lots of things. What is still very open is what is the actual interaction between having these new grid forming technologies, the traditional grid following technologies, the power electronics technologies, and in areas where there are the controllers like synchronous machines and synchronous condensers, how are they really going to interact with each other? So the issue of interactions is still all to understand, because again, the magic of the grid, the synchronous grid, is effectively self-synchronization and all that, which disappears the moment that you do not have dynamics, right? Power electronics doesn't have dynamics, it's all control. So how can we design stable controllers with hundreds of thousands or even millions of devices that are starting interacting with each other? Effectively, some of them performing the kind of the master functionality and the other following the kind of slave functionality we use, like old terminology. I think this issue of the interaction of controllers and stability is unsolved yet. But in Australia, they are run. It has been demonstrated that these technologies can perform very, very well when you take few of them independently. when you look at all of them together, I mean, again, we don't know even on papers how they would behave. Forget about the kind of the real world.
Great. Thank you very much, Pierluigi.
Thank you.